So sometimes when people come to the monastery, typically they'll have some meditation object or they'll be given a meditation object. Quite often it's Anapanasati or Four Elements meditation. And sometimes people have some problem with this in the sense they can't get their minds to settle down and they prefer to have a bit more of an active meditation object. And so there's one sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, Majjhima number 19, Dveda Vitaka Sutta. So today I thought we could take a look at this sutta. First we'll give a little overview of it, and then we're going to unpack it a bit, and then look at it in a practical sense, how we can convert some of the traditional meditation objects to use some of this mental energy in case you find yourself in this situation where you'd like to do more analytical meditation or something like that before you practice pure samatha meditation. So the Dveda Vitaka Sutta is a bit unusual. It actually is a common paradigm. There are quite a few suttas where the Buddha is talking about his practice before enlightenment, when he was only a bodhisattva. But this one takes a different angle. So usually we hear the stories of the bodhisattva practicing austerities, so not eating, exerting great effort, eventually passing out, and then sort of rejecting this kind of excessive effort. In this sutta, the Buddha says at that time when he was practicing, he thought to himself, what if I were to divide my thoughts into two kinds of thoughts? And then so he's taken the three kinds of thinking from the Samma Sankappa, so from right intention, from the Noble Eightfold Path. Here he's using the word vitaka, meaning thinking rather than intention. But so we have kama vitaka, so the thought of sensuality. And then we have vihingsa vitaka, thought of harming. And then we have vyapada vitaka, a thought of anger, an angry thought. And so what if he were to divide all of his thoughts into that one group, and they're opposites, and then just check out the results. And so we know that the Buddha's parami were different from our parami. So when he did this, he immediately saw the drawbacks of the negative thoughts. And immediately upon contemplating the drawbacks, they started to drop away, and his mind became exclusively wholesome. And so at that point, the Bodhisattva reflected on his practice. If I were to spend the whole day, the whole night practicing this way, there would be no harm. But simply, my mind would be tired. The body would be tired. So what if I were to focus on one object? And so then he takes a meditation object. And then, of course, as I said, the Bodhisattva's parami are different from other people. He can attain jhana right away. And then he can get the three abhinyas, the recollection of past of past lives, of the rising and passing of beings, and then he can attain full enlightenment. So we have in just a few pages the path of somebody who sits down to meditate, and then their mind is full of a mix of wholesome and unwholesome thoughts, and then a few minutes later they're enlightened. So we can understand that the Buddha has summarized this for us. So let's take a back step now. What were the steps that actually went on there? And so let's look at a quote. I won't read the whole sutta. I just wanted to quote from the first section of the sutta, where the Bodhisattva was actually distinguishing these two kinds of thoughts. So, and as I remained thus translation by Ajahn Thanissaro. And as I remained thus heedful, ardent and resolute, thinking imbued with sensuality arose in me. I discerned that thinking imbued with sensuality has arisen in me, and that leads to my own affliction, or to the affliction of others, or to the affliction of both. It obstructs discernment, promotes vexation, and does not lead to unbinding. As I noticed that it leads to my own affliction, it subsided. As I noticed that it leads to the affliction of others, to the affliction of both. It instructs discernment, promotes vexation, and does not lead to unbinding. It subsided. Whenever thinking imbued with sensuality has arisen, I simply abandoned it, destroyed it, dispelled it, and wiped it out of existence. So there are a few things that meditators need to take note of here. And one of them is that there are certain kinds of thoughts that are harmful and certain kinds that are not. But also that it's important that we recognize these kinds of thoughts. So it's not actually a given, it's not actually a given that somebody will immediately know a certain kind of thinking is wholesome or unwholesome. And so it actually takes quite a lot of contemplation. And you can see a lot of the Mahasatipatthana Sutta is dedicated to this kind of contemplation. But it can also be used in different parts of the path. And so in order just to prepare for practicing some, to develop your concentration, it can be quite helpful to contemplate some of these unwholesome and wholesome qualities. And then the Bodhisattva is contemplating the results. And so he uses a simile of a cow herd. Of course, in ancient India, cows were much more important. I suppose in Australia they're also important, but you don't have very many cow herds anymore, trying to keep them from wandering onto the paddy fields. So then he reflected on the cow herd when the crops are ripening. The cow herd has to be very careful not to let the cows go on to the other crops. Why not? Because if he were to do so, then he would break the law, he would be punished. And so in those days, it didn't mean a fine. Then the king would usually confiscate your property or imprison you or torture you. So in the same way, the Bodhisattva reflects that certain kinds of thoughts, like a thought of harming others, they will lead to proliferation of that kind of thought. And then they can lead to further harm down the line. So, as I said, then this sort of practice that I wanted to encourage today, it's for people who have too much thinking mind, for people who want to go straight to their main samatha object. That's also okay. But for people who want to start out with some contemplation, there are various ways to do it at this stage. And so one is to use a sutta, like for example, Sallekha Sutta from the Majjhima Nikaya. And in that sutta, then the Buddha gives us 44 sets of qualities. Then he gives a set of negative qualities and then their opposites. And so, for example, vengefulness and non-vengefulness, or pride and humility, or deceit and honesty. And so in that sutta, it mentions these in 4 contexts, but essentially one side is to be cultivated, one side is not to be cultivated. And so how can we contemplate these in our own minds? So one way is to use memory. So we can contemplate in the past then, well, have I ever been proud in the past? So if you think back and you think, well, I've never been proud in the past, then okay, then you're a very humble person. But many people will have some kind of incident. Maybe then when they were a child, they felt very proud. They thought, their school teacher, they don't know what they're talking about. I know what I'm talking about, and I know, why do these adults, they think they know everything, but we kids, we know everything. So you can think back about to something in the past, and just remember what that kind of mind is like. So what are the causes for it? Or what does the mind focus on when that arises? And then what does it feel like? What did it feel like in the body? And so you can go through and then understand about that quality. And you can understand about the negative effects of that quality. So it is helpful to use something at a bit of a distance. So if you take a memory that's further from the past, so like when you're a child, it's very easy to put it into context. Oh, I was just being unreasonably angry, or I was being unreasonably proud. But if you take something from last week and you got in an argument with your boss or your spouse or your children, it can be too raw sometimes. And so when you try to contemplate it, then it's not so easy to depersonalize it. Sometimes you think, well, I was angry, but it's not my fault. That person did something wrong. It's their fault. So we want to take a situation that we have a bit of distance, psychological distance from. So we can do it from the past objects. We can also contemplate the present objects that are arising. So remember, this is mostly for people who are coming to the retreat with too much thinking. So quite frequently, that thinking will be either about their family, about their work, or about some kind of health situation. So for example, someone comes to meditate and then their mother had a fall last week or something, and then they're concerned about her health. Oh, she's out of the hospital now, but how can we make sure it doesn't happen again, and what kind of care do we need? So it's quite a wholesome line of thinking, but it's in a way, like the intention is wholesome, but the fear and the distraction is unwholesome. So to contemplate, this is what fear is like, the wanting something to be different, and then what kind of dislike is arising because of that. We call it, in the Abhidhamma tradition, they'll call it a dosa chitta. Fear comes under dosa category. Or quite frequently, it will be a thought about children. So sometimes meditators come to the monastery, then they have young children, and they just have simple attachment. They can't stop thinking about their children because that's what they do all day, right? They're taking care of them, and they want them to be happy, and they're very happy that they have a new family. But because of this attachment, then their minds are going here and there. And so then they can contemplate what this kind of a mind, this kind of attached mind is like. So this would come under, according to the Abhidhamma tradition, would come under a lobha chitta, or a greedy type of mind. And so we have the present and we have the past we can contemplate internally. It's also possible to contemplate a little bit externally. And when we're contemplating these kinds of things externally, sometimes it's helpful to look at animals, and I'm not talking about all animals, but certain animals, they display, you can sort of tell their emotion from the behavior. So, as you just heard, I ordained in Sri Lanka. And if you know Sri Lanka, it has a lot of forest. So our monastery is quite heavily forested. And our meditation hall is sort of on a hill right in the middle of the forest. And so every day there'll be troops of monkeys coming by. So we have a few kinds of monkeys. We have the purple-faced leaf monkey, so it's a kind of langur. And then we have the macaques. And so the macaques are quite mischievous. And so they'll come and so then they have some tricks. They'll have some tricks. So then if a monk is walking down the path and the monkey sees the monk has a bag, then one monkey will come up in front and do a little dance and pretend to do something naughty. And so the monk will get distracted, and then the other monkey will come from behind and try to steal the bag. So they have like this tag team thing. Or sometimes they try to go to the locker area where the monks keep their sandals and their water bottles. Then maybe they can get something interesting. They can find some kind of herbal tea or something they can steal. So then they'll go there. So we see this kind of a deceitful mind. And so sometimes it's easy for us, we can imagine this kind of deceitful mind externally. And inside because we have some justifications, well, I'm not deceitful, I'm an honest person. But when we see it externally, we can understand this is what a deceitful mind is like, sort of in an impersonal way. And then you can also see with these macaques, they can also be very possessive. So I remember one time I was sitting outside the meditation hall, and then I'm not sure what they call them, troops maybe? Troops of macaques. Anyway, a whole group of them came, and they were making a ruckus. And then that was the season where they had the baby monkeys. Maybe they'd just been born that week. And so there was a little baby monkey eating some of these nuts or something that have fallen from the trees. And so I sort of opened my eyes and I saw it. I was looking at it. And the mother was there. And as soon as the mother saw that I was looking at her child, she went over and grabbed it and put it under her arm to protect it, right? So you can see this possessiveness, this fear of strangers, these strange creatures sitting outside of that building over there. So we can use, if there's some kind of an animal that you have contact with or you have in the past, and you can contemplate these sorts of different mind states. And now, if you want to do this, some people actually really like this kind of practice, and if you're more drawn to this a little bit, adding some thinking into your practice, it's helpful to go through like one of the lists. And so I mentioned the Saleka Sutta. It has a list of 44 qualities, and you can go through those one by one and sort of contemplate them at first in whatever way is clearest, either presently arising, past arising, externally, internally. It doesn't matter, because you're trying to build wisdom and you're trying to get the mind prepared to meditate and to develop your good qualities further. Now, in the Sutta Dveda Vitakka Sutta, it's also quite notable that the Bodhisattva contemplated the danger. So the dangers of these unwholesome thoughts. And so we can also contemplate that. And this is actually a technique that is used in the Vitakka Santana Sutta, which is one of the more important suttas about sort of how to settle down your mind if you're having too much thinking. It's also in the Majjhima Nikaya. And so one of the contemplations there for somebody in whom these thoughts don't immediately cease is to contemplate the danger. Then they use this simile of like a young man or woman looking in a mirror, and then they were to see, oh, there's a dead animal hanging from my neck. Then they would feel disgusted. They would feel it's unsuitable for a young and beautiful woman or a young and handsome man to have this ugly thing hanging from my neck. And so then contemplating the sort of the unsuitability, the danger of these unwholesome thoughts. You can contemplate the danger in sense of karma, so in sense of future lives, but you can also contemplate in the sense of the present dangers in the present lives, what kind of actions it might lead you to. And again, it can be helpful to contemplate externally. If, for example, you know some stories from some celebrity or something who's got their lives in a big mess, then if you know that story, you can contemplate that and say, oh, this is if someone gets, if they let their mind get unbalanced, if they get swayed by bad friends, and these sorts of results can come in this life. And so there's another simile that the Buddha gives in this sutta, a little bit in this regard, so I'm going to quote from that now. So of course the sutta is addressed to monks, but it applies to all meditators. Whatever a monk keeps pursuing with his thinking and pondering, that becomes the inclination of his awareness. If a monk keeps pursuing thinking imbued with sensuality, abandoning thinking imbued with renunciation, his mind is bent by that thinking imbued with sensuality. If a monk keeps pursuing thinking imbued with ill will, abandoning thinking imbued with non-ill will, his mind is bent by that thinking imbued with ill will. If a monk keeps pursuing thinking imbued with harmfulness, abandoning thinking imbued with harmlessness, his mind is bent by that thinking imbued with harmfulness. So we have this situation where our habits form our personality, right? So then I think anybody we can see from reflecting on our own lives, but I think especially parents can see from trying to raise children how if you have if you have a young child with behavioral problems, for example, then you need to take some kind of corrective measures, and then over the course of time, you can see amazing changes. So you can see that someone who was a very angry, sort of overactive child at the age of 7, but by the age of 9, they could have completely turned around their behavior. Sort of, it can be really astonishing the kind of changes that can be made. And so this is a common theme throughout the suttas, and it's one of the reasons that it's helpful to do this kind of contemplation of the negative and positive mind states outside of our simple, like practicing anapanasati, for example, because it helps us to develop these good qualities as a habit. So I'm just going to read some excerpts from the Anguttara Nikaya. There are two suttas where the Buddha is contrasting the intentions and inclinations of people who are, in the one case, well, we hear. So the one is the case of the Khattiya, or the noble warrior class. So of course, somebody who is a Khattiya in ancient India would hope in the future to become like not a king, but maybe like a tribal chieftain or something like that. And so this is from the Fives. I'm abridging. This translation is by Bhikkhu Bodhi. So these thoughts are the thoughts of the eldest son of a head-anointed Khattiya king. It occurs to him, I am well born, as far back as the 7th paternal generation, so why shouldn't I yearn to be the viceroy? I am handsome, attractive, graceful, possessing supreme beauty of complexion, so why shouldn't I yearn to be the viceroy? I am pleasing and agreeable to my parents, so why shouldn't I yearn to be the viceroy? I am pleasing and agreeable to the armed forces, so why shouldn't I yearn to be the viceroy? I am wise, competent, and intelligent, able to consider benefits pertaining to the past, future, and present, so why shouldn't I yearn to be the viceroy? Possessing these 5 factors, the eldest son of a head-anointed Khattiya king yearns to be the viceroy. So you see, you can see a parallel to young people, to young people in modern society. You can think of somebody who, quite typically around the age of 15, depending on what culture you're from, of course, but our monastery, we have a lot of young Sinhalese people, and the teenagers often want to be a doctor or an engineer. And so then their minds are inclining in a similar way. Then, well, I am sort of an intelligent young person in Australia, and I have a chance to go to university, and why don't I become a doctor or an engineer? And it's not exactly, it's not an unwholesome thing, but it's the inclination of the mind, and it's coming through a certain kind of training and contemplation. So somebody else might contemplate they want to play cricket, or they want to be an accountant or whatever. But because of this repeated intention, then their mind inclines that way. So then the Buddha contrasts this in this sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. He contrasts this with somebody who is intent on attaining Nibbana as their main goal. Of course, you can have other goals in life also, but it occurs to him, so he mentions a bhikkhu. It occurs to him, I am virtuous. I train. He trains in the training rules. So why shouldn't I yearn for the destruction of the taints? I have learned much and penetrated well by view. So why shouldn't I yearn for the destruction of the taints? I am one whose mind is well established in the 4 establishments of mindfulness. So why shouldn't I yearn for the destruction of the taints? I have aroused energy for the abandoning of unwholesome qualities. not casting off the duty of cultivating wholesome qualities. So why shouldn't I yearn for the destruction of the taints? I am wise, I possess wisdom that leads to the complete destruction of suffering. So why shouldn't I yearn for the destruction of the taints? Possessing these 5 qualities, a bhikkhu yearns for the destruction of the taints. So again, somebody who's seeking after nibbana, then if they can repeatedly incline their mind that way, then in the future it will be kind of a snowball effect. So more and more inclining towards this attainment of the destruction of the taints. And then there's another example from the Anguttara Nikaya that's a little bit humorous. So the Buddha is comparing one of the ascetics trying to practice nibbana, their intentions, practice for nibbana, compared to a thief who's trying to steal something. So we'll hear their intentions also from the Anguttara translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Robbery, Brahman, is the aim of thieves. Their quest is for thickets. Craftiness is their support. They are intent on dark places, and their final goal is to remain unseen. And then by contrast, patience and mildness, Brahman, is the aim of ascetics. Their quest is for wisdom. Virtuous behavior is their support. They are intent on nothingness, and their final goal is nibbana. So it's a similar point, probably no need to elaborate, but when we're faced with this, so we can understand this situation, but there is a bit of an aspect of, well, how do we incline our minds towards nibbana? How do we sort of get our minds in a state where we're sort of able to sustain this kind of habitual thinking? So especially if we start out like a thief, which can happen sometimes. It's not uncommon that somebody will come to the monastery because they have a drug problem or something like this, or they have some difficulties in their life and they're trying to make a big change. So in the sutta, this Dveda Vitakka Sutta, the Bodhisattva says that if he were to contemplate, or he was in a wholesome way for a day and a night, or he would not see any drawback, except that his mind would get tired. However, it's not that easy to think only wholesome thoughts, even for one day and one night. So ideally, we could do it like, if we think about it, well, why don't I just do that the rest of my life? But first, you can try for 1 hour or 2 hours, and one night, one day, something like that. And then you'll understand it's not that an easy problem to solve. But we have some methods. So if you go about it methodically, then you have a lot better chance. So if you just sit down and you think to yourself, I will think only good thoughts, then your chances of success are not that high. So it's not uncommon to hear stories from long-term meditators, especially people who came to the Dhamma like in the 1960s or something, when they didn't have proper information like we have now, in Western countries. And the stories often go something like this, then, oh, I heard that if you spent all night meditating, then you would attain enlightenment. And so then they sat down with the determination that they would just attain nibbana. In fact, I know one individual who practiced some kind of a yogic technique, and he actually injured himself because he had heard if he had practiced this all night, he would be able to attain. And so the intention is there, but they didn't have some kind of a good method. And so if we have a suitable subject of contemplation or a suitable method, then we have a lot better chance. And so one of the ways I was mentioning earlier is to contemplate these wholesome and unwholesome. But we have quite a few other methods if we want to train a style of wholesome thinking. And so I just wanted to go through two of them. One of them is a very traditional meditation object, and the other one is for those who are more inclined towards study. And so for those who are more inclined towards study, it can be helpful to choose a sutta to contemplate. And so you can choose, I wouldn't recommend a Digha Nikaya sutta, they're just too long. Maybe something from the Samyutta Nikaya or the Majjhima Nikaya. And then you can read the sutta, and after reading it, maybe better to clarify any points that you're not clear about. And then when you sit down to meditate, say you have 1 hour to meditate, then you can start just by recalling the sutta, step by step. Then you can imagine to yourself the Buddha is coming to Savatthi. He arrives in Savatthi and he sits down in Jetavanarama, he addresses the monks, and then somebody asks a question, and then somebody interrupts, and then the Buddha talks about the 5 khandhas, or about the salayatana, or about the pancha nivarana, whatever topic the Buddha is talking about. And then, finally, what's the result of the sutta? And it can be a very helpful exercise to try to keep it in mind, sort of what was going on in the sutta. It also helps you to figure out sort of where your understanding of that sutta is weak. So maybe you can make a note of it to yourself. Oh, I didn't quite understand that section. Next time I get a chance, I should ask about it. And then to go through the sutta step by step and just recall it. If that kind of method, this is not that popular of a method, but it can be helpful. But perhaps something that would be have a broader appeal would be to choose a sutta like, for example, Mahamangala Sutta or Karaniya Metta Sutta that you chant all the time. And to go through it step by step and take, maybe just for that meditation session, you can go through one gatha and then just think about the meaning of that verse. In fact, some people when they hear like a detailed analysis of Mahamangala Sutta or Karaniya Metta Sutta, then often they'll realize, I hadn't thought about those verses in years, maybe 10, 20 years. I didn't think about what those verses mean. Of course, I knew what they meant, but I didn't think about it. So this is another way. So these are, again, for more analytic or study-oriented people. But one of the meditation objects that is considered suitable for everyone, so we have the 4 guardian meditations are considered suitable for everyone, right? We have Buddhanussati, recollection of the Buddha, and then we have Marananussati, recollection of death, and then we have this Asubha, or repulsiveness of the body, and Metta, or loving kindness meditation. They're considered suitable for people of all characters. And so then the traditional method of practicing this Marananussati, or recollection of death, can be quite helpful for people whose mind is overly active. And that's for 2 reasons. So the one reason is it actually inclines you to practice your meditation so that your meditation will settle down. And the other reason is the method itself has some active contemplations. So the Visuddhimagga gives 8 different angles to take with Marananussati. And it's actually I think it's too much to explain today. Maybe we'll just go through a little bit. But one way of practicing Marananussati is to take the verse, death is certain, life uncertain. Death is certain, life uncertain. So we have certain Pali verse with this meaning. In Sinhala, they have a nice verse that they frequently use with a similar meaning. And so for somebody taking this as a pure samatha object, it's recommended they can imagine an image of their own body in front of them and then doing this contemplation. But that it's not necessary to do it that way. It's also possible to contemplate externally. And so to think in the past, the different sorts of people that you've known who've passed away, and sort of the different aspects of this uncertainty. So as they say, like we know that we will die, but we don't know where. We don't know when. Like in the Dhammapada story of the young woman, if you know that story, she comes. The Buddha gives her a Dhamma teaching, and then the next year, and she comes back and he gives her another, and he asks her some questions. He said, "Well, where are you going?" "Oh, I don't know." And then, "Where did you come from?" "Oh, I don't know," like this. And all of the answers, "I don't know, I don't know, I don't know." And then after that, she leaves, and then all of the people think that, oh, she's a crazy young girl. But the Buddha says, no, she's very wise. She's understood. She doesn't know where she came from in the past life, and she doesn't know where she'll go in the future life. She doesn't know when. She doesn't know when she'll get there. So we can contemplate in this way. One of the ways that is recommended is to contemplate the people of the past who had some extraordinary qualities. So, of course, traditionally to talk about like the giants or the great warriors and things like that, or the great spiritual leaders like the Buddha himself or Mahakassapa or Mahamoggallana, and they've all passed away, whatever kind of spiritual attainment they had, but still their body has to pass away. And so in the modern day, you have much more access to information than they would have had in ancient times. And so we know about lots of sort of famous people of extraordinary qualities who passed away. And we know like how uncertain the time is. So some of these people, if anybody who's interested in Kung Fu movies, they probably heard of Bruce Lee. And so Bruce Lee was a big star in the 1960s and 70s in Hong Kong. And so you can see in sort of that genre, these sort of martial arts type movies, the characters they look very powerful, sort of almost invincible. But then you have a person who died very suddenly. I'm not sure the age, maybe age 32 or something like that. And so we can contemplate in this way, even though like somebody might seem invincible, but that's not actually in accord with reality. Like at some time we do have to pass away. So now we have these different kinds of ways of contemplating, either through a sutta or contemplating the mind or contemplating death. Of course, there are many other ways. But the sutta goes on, of course. The bodhisattva goes beyond that because he has to attain nibbana. So we won't have time to go through everything, but the last step I wanted to discuss is how to transition from this sort of object that is more analytical to a simpler object. So then the Buddha says if he kept contemplating this way, then his body would have become tired, his mind would have become tired. So he made the mind one and he attained jhana, and he eventually he went through the different supernormal knowledges. So in fact it's quite simple. It's quite simple to transition. If you're practicing Maranussati, you can simply practice it as a samatha object and just use the word death and just think like death is certain, life uncertain, or just think death, 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 and to focus on it that way. Or you can just choose any of the samatha objects. And so typically meditators will have their favorite object. Often it's anapanasati. It can be a white kasina or a skeleton, whatever object they like. And so you can just simply leave aside the analytic meditation and take up your normal samatha meditation object and practice it in the way that you normally do. And so if that meditation is developing very deeply, of course, it's better to practice under guidance of a good teacher, and then they can lead you through further development of that and transition to deeper Vipassana meditation. So I wish that all of you may be able to develop your analytical skills and your wholesome qualities, and then all of you can attain Nibbana as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Bhante, for the talk. Now come to the question time. We will alternate the question between the room and online audience. So if you have question in the room, you can raise your hand. We pass on the mic to you. Thank you. Yes. So we have an online question, Bhante. I meditate without a meditation object. I simply meditate with bare awareness for 3 hours per day, not in a row, since last year. The only problem is that my body cannot be still for much longer compared the year before. So can you please advise me how to be still in the body, please? For additional information, I meditate on chair. I enjoy bare awareness meditation. Thank you.
So they just want to sit longer, or I couldn't quite understand. They want to sit longer than 3 hours. Is that what they're saying?
Yeah, that's one of the, I think, problem that one of the problem. Another problem is the body cannot be still. Yeah.
Okay. I think with this kind of a problem probably requires some feedback from a teacher. So it's better for this meditator to actually to come and speak with a teacher about it. So just to give an initial thing to try would be to take some of the meditation session where you're practicing this bare awareness, and then to swap your meditation object to practice Anapanasati for a while, or practice death contemplation for a while, and see what result it has, see what your body feels like, and see if there's a change. And then at that stage, I mean, because there's a lot of things that can be going on. Like sometimes if the body is not settled, then the cause can be the body. So for example, the body is not still. It can be a digestive problem. Maybe your belly is full of gas. You had too much bran flakes in the morning. Or maybe there's some kind of like a blood sugar problem, and so then the body feels uncomfortable. You have all kinds of different things that can be wrong in the body, but it can also be an unsuitable meditation object. So it can be that with this bare awareness at this time, then the mind doesn't want to go deeper, and so the body doesn't become calm. Then it might be helpful to switch objects. But I think that realistically, if you're meditating 3 hours a day and you have some obstacle, it's good to be able to talk to a teacher in person and sort of have them try a few things out and get some feedback from them. So together you can find a solution.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you for talk, Bhante. So just a question then around about, if one adopts, sort of what you've been talking about today, which is extremely interesting, I have to say, the transition and the sort of the time frames that one might use, is it sort of, if you're normally sitting, say, for example, for an hour, would it be appropriate to set a certain amount of time to say, well, I will do some analytic meditation and then change? Or is it more about watching the quality of the mind and then the point at which you might change?
So with this kind of a practice, it depends on somebody's goals and how their meditation is progressing. So for somebody whose meditation is going quite smoothly, they're satisfied with their concentration. In that case, maybe they just want to set a certain amount of time. So they'll say, I'm going to spend the first 15 minutes or something contemplating, then I'm going to switch objects. But for somebody who's more stuck, then they're trying to get over some obstacle in their meditation, or they find that their sitting meditation is good, but they're having trouble integrating it in daily life. In this kind of a situation, maybe they just want to play it by ear and see sort of what leads to sort of correcting the problem that they're encountering.
Bante, there's a follow-on question from the first question. Can a teacher be exclusively online?
Can a teacher be exclusively online? I don't know. I mean, so I typically stayed in Sri Lanka. You heard I stayed in Sri Lanka most of my monastic life. So typically, like if I was teaching somebody, they would come to the monastery. There would be somebody who's staying at the monastery for a month or 2 months or something, or they're staying longer term. And then we also have other teachers there, so that like if one teacher is not able to help that meditator, there's another teacher to take over. And so that would be like the system that I'm most familiar with. And then, but if some teachers are teaching exclusively online and it's working for the students, then I can't criticize it. I just don't have experience with that kind of thing.
Regular meditation session. Online meditation. Yeah. You might want to say something.
It's okay.
Meditation.
It's okay. Bhante, can you talk a bit about the nimitta? Bhante, can you talk a bit about the nimitta as a meditation object?
Yeah, so this word gets used differently in different places. So in the sort of the Visuddhimagga or the Vimuttimagga, or the Parisambhidamagga, they're talking about this lights that start to appear in different ways. So if, for example, somebody is practicing Anapanasati, and then later it will feel like there's sort of a brightness appearing around their face or around their nostrils. And then this kind of a light, usually at first, the meditator comes in to the teacher, they'll say, they have doubt. Oh, is it just like the window is opened or something? Maybe the sun came out. And then later, maybe they're meditating in the morning, and then they realize, oh, it's still dark outside, but inside my mind is very bright. And so with this kind of this object we call a nimitta, but there are different categories of nimitta. I think it's too complicated to go into in detail. But at a certain stage, then the nimitta becomes part of the meditation object. Or in some cases, for example, for kasina, the nimitta is taken completely as the meditation object. And I think this is one you need some instruction from a teacher. But in the Thai tradition, some of the Thai teachers are using a different explanation of the word nimitta. And so you can read, for example, Ajahn Tun's biography. He's talking about nimittas as like a movie that plays before your eyes when you meditate. So he'll have these elaborate visions of different things. And so in the Visuddhimagga or something, that's not really called a nimitta. So I would say that, yeah, this word is being used in different ways. Not to say, I mean, it's just language, but to understand that the experience behind the language might be different according to different teachers' usage.
Ajahn, we have another online questions. Could you please share more about white kasina? How will it be a favorite object?
Okay, so yeah, so different places have different, different teachers prefer different objects. So in Sri Lanka or in Burma, some people will take a skeleton as their main meditation object. It's quite a popular one. And so usually the meditators they'll start by scanning, the step-by-step, preferably they can develop some degree of anapanasati first, but they'll scan their body and then they'll think bones, 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 until it's like they can see the bones directly in their mind. And so when that happens, then the bones start to glow a whitish color. At that time, this is how they can practice the kasina internally. And so in Myanmar, some of the teachers are teaching this way, instead of using an external disc for a kasina, to practice internally, and then until like this white color of the bones develops into a uniform white light, and focusing on that. And so this is quite a popular object amongst long-term meditators in certain places. Of course, some other teachers don't like to teach this kind of object.
Thank you, Bhante.
Any more questions from the room?
Two questions here. So then we have, in a sense, a plethora of objects. So, we have to make some decisions about what may or may not be beneficial. Now, in a sense, that becomes wisdom itself. But I'm wondering if you would like to say something about how one make such choices.
Sure. So you see the choices. So realize that if you're, for example, working in Melbourne full time, then you don't have as much time to meditate. If you live in the jungle and you have all day to meditate, then you don't have to make so many choices, right? Because you have years and years and years to choose, to try different things, to practice different things. And so we don't normally think of it as an exclusive choice, because even people who are very busy right now, quite frequently, like once they retire, then they'll have more time to meditate. And so then they'll have time to try different things. So, but speaking generally of regarding meditation objects, really we're trying to develop qualities within our own minds. So if you understand these different qualities of like humility or concentration or determination or whatever qualities you're trying to develop, and then say, for example, somebody is practicing, they're practicing anapanasati, and then they get to quite a good level, they feel their concentration's quite good, and then later they start to practice more analytical meditation. But because of the analytical meditation, they develop patience, or they develop humility, or they develop knowledge or something like that. Then in my view, they didn't waste their time, right? They're still developing themselves. But it is good to have at least one pure samatha object that you can use to rest the mind. So even if you don't have it to a very, very deep level, I would say the minimum level, like all meditators, even the most casual meditators, should try to get to the level where they like to meditate. You see, if you can't get to that level where you actually enjoy sitting down to meditate, then your life is a lot more difficult as a Buddhist. So that's sort of some short thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, we have one more question in the back.
Thank you for a most interesting talk, Bhante. Back to this point, I think a very important one, that it would be very hard if one can't reach a point of enjoying meditation. I just as a question, sort of statement, question thing. Sometimes when myself, I have very restful meditation and I'm at peace. but sometimes an issue will emerge, you know, something pertaining to regular life activities that, you know, have upset one's equilibrium somewhat. Might be to do with other people and needing to understand what's really going on. I'm in the habit of letting that stuff arise because I suppose I find it valuable, extremely valuable, and then I might return to a more restful, to the object, say the breath, a more restful meditation. I just wondered, do you have any comment on that? Allowing that, and I suppose I don't judge that very much, whether it's useful or positive or negative, or it's something that occurs almost of itself. Yeah, thank you.
Well, it sounds like you're already quite self-aware of these things. I think one general comment is when we have a practice like this, it's to look at the effect it has on your mind over the course of time. So then just to see, even though like you might be upset at that time, then later your mind is more calm. And especially since when you're sitting down, hopefully you're not doing anything negative, like you're letting it break out into speech or action. So if over time, then it has a positive result, then it may be worthwhile. So you just have to use your wisdom, I think, with this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bhante, for being here today. My question is regarding meditation object. And I'm just wondering whether Bhante would recommend any meditation object that would be helpful to open mind. What I mean by open mind is like in everyday life, seeing things without expecting it to happen in certain way. In other words, you know, being flexible and being able to, I guess, focus on the effective of the outcome and not the way of how things should be operated, if you would know what I mean. Yeah.
So sometimes I think this is personal opinion. I don't have a sutta reference for this, but my opinion is that like sometimes an indirect approach can be more helpful than a direct approach. So if you're thinking, I'll be open to how things change and I won't care about success or failure, I think that it's probably not the way to actually get that result. But if you do, for example, Buddhanusati, so if you carry a japa mala with you and then you're contemplating the 9 qualities of the Buddha, and you try to stay with that as much as possible and sort of remember Buddha Dhamma Sangha as your refuge, I think that gives you kind of a place of strength to deal with these changes. So you might not necessarily be fully open to them. You might be a little bit upset, but then you have this sort of a balanced point of faith to come at them through. So, I mean, it depends on your character, but for a lot of people, I think that it can be very helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, no more online questions. No. Any other question in the room?
Hello. I suppose I have an unusual question. Is this on? Yes. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I used to meditate quite a lot. I never had any trouble meditating. But now I'm getting older. I find when I go into meditation, I have great meditation for a really short time. And I wake up in the morning, I feel great. but then within 10 minutes or even 5 minutes of coming out of my meditation or waking up, I feel like my body is so old and it's crippled and it doesn't like being alive. So I was wondering, how can I bridge this gap between having great meditation and great sleep into being great in the day?
Well, we have two aspects here. One is it's true that the body plays tricks on us, and so it's not only with age, right? You can hear lots of stories of people in their teens or their 20s who have some injury or something, and then they have to live with chronic pain, or they have arthritis and these sorts of things. So that one we have to learn to deal with. But if you try to practice more walking meditation, or some people don't like walking meditation, but they can do some kind of Qigong type of exercise. Trying to practice that, just mindfulness of postures, like in the Satipatthana Sutta, there's Iriyapata Sampajanya. So understanding that you're not just walking, or you're not just doing this Qigong, but you're doing it with the intention of keeping your mind present in the body. And sometimes this can help with what you're describing. In the same way that beginning meditators, usually, like, somebody comes down to sit for the first time, and then they come up from the sitting and they say, "Oh, it's like my body is filled with pain. I never realized how much pain was in the body." But after a few weeks, even though their samadhi is not very good yet, but still all of a sudden that it's good enough that they don't feel like all of these aches and pains in the same way. So I don't know your actual health problems, but I would encourage you to experiment with meditating in different postures, and that may entail changing objects. So, for example, you can try paying attention to the posture while doing walking, or you can try paying attention to the breathing while doing walking, or you can try doing Buddhanusati during walking, and try to find a solution that actually can solve the problem.
I'll just check whether there's any online questions before.
No more online questions.
Hello. I just wanted to ask, what's the best environment at home to meditate in? I know that sounds a bit silly, but I live in a very small apartment, and there's not sort of like some dedicated room that I have to meditate. So I just want some advice, please, and your surroundings. Like, I get very distracted with things in the room when I meditate, and I just wanted any advice, please, on, should I be in the lounge room or should I go into my bedroom, or what would help, please? Thank you.
That's it's a good point. It's a very good point. If you have an enclosed space and it's a bit crowded and you have distractions, it can be hard to meditate. Especially if you can't dedicate even one corner of the room for meditation. But what you can do, if you think, for example, somebody they have a very small apartment, maybe they have like a fold-out exercise bike, and so they don't have the bike out in the middle of the room all the time, but when they go to exercise, then they move the couch, then they put out the bike, they set out the mat so it doesn't damage the floor. I think to have like a bit of a routine about it, in that sense. So maybe when you're sitting down to meditate, then you're going to, move some furniture a little bit and set out your meditation seat in a very nice way. Maybe you can put, I don't know, would you, if you have a picture of the Buddha or something, or you can put some flowers in front of you, and then sort of to prepare the space in some way, and to prepare it that way each time. And of course, I would, depending on how many people are in the apartment, and of course you want to be in a place where no one's going to walk right by you. That would be probably the primary concern.
Thank you, Bhante. I think it's probably, we're up.
Thanks so much, Bhante, for the talk today.
Thanks, Sukhihoto. Thank you.